Hello, and welcome to another episode of Celiac Straight Talk, a Beyond Celiac production. Beyond Celiac is the most recognized voluntary health organization in celiac disease, accelerating research for treatments and a cure, and dedicated to supporting the celiac disease community in managing this serious genetic autoimmune disorder. In this episode of Celiac Straight Talk, Beyond Celiac CEO Alice Bast interviews Jackson Dunckel, the Chief Financial Officer of AMG, a manufacturing company based in Wayne, Pennsylvania. Jackson shares his celiac story in a candid conversation, from his delayed diagnosis in 2002 to managing his health today. In particular, Jackson shares his perspective as a long-time diagnosed man managing this serious genetic autoimmune disease.
Jackson, so introduce yourself. Tell me a little bit about yourself and tell me about your journey to diagnosis with celiac disease.
Yeah, so my journey to diagnosis was long and complicated, as I'm sure it is for virtually everybody with the disease. Namely, as a college graduate, I decided to travel after school and ended up climbing the Jebel Mara, an extinct volcano in eastern Sudan, where I got amoebic dysentery. And as you probably know, the treatment for amoebic dysentery is a massive dose of effectively poison. And then it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to recover. And very interestingly, the only food available while backpacking, effectively that's what we're doing, we're backpacking in the, was wheat porridge. Served with a meat sauce, a little tiny bit of meat sauce to make it flavorful. So I took this poison and then nourished myself for 2 weeks while climbing the volcano with wheat porridge. After returning, I had a lot of, I didn't return, I actually went to go work on a farm in Germany and had all sorts of horrible things happen. One, I was starving to death. So I ate like a horse, and the father of the family really thought of me as a loss maker because I ate too much. And
so you ate them out of house and home.
I ate them out of house and home, which is hard to do when they're farmers. And then secondly, I had all sorts of kind of physical ailments, aches and pains and whatever, and never got properly diagnosed. And, scroll forward, 10 years later, I was still having issues with my digestive system. And so I went to the Tropical Disease Center in San Francisco. They diagnosed nothing. I went to the Tropical Disease Center in London, obviously one of the best tropical disease centers in the world. They diagnosed nothing. And so I said to myself, well, it's a form of, you got poisoned and, you're just going to have to live with some kind of problem with your gut for the rest of your life. Moved to New York, and a very elderly doctor, I like to call him the doctor of doctors, because while he was examining you, he would constantly pick up the phone to other doctors who were calling in with patients who were, in severe distress, and advise them what to do. And he gave me a celiac panel and said, "You've got the trigger. It's obviously not determinative whether or not you're a celiac, but you could try to not eat wheat and see what happens." I stopped eating wheat. It was very hard, particularly beer. But
did he mention a gluten-free diet, or did he say just stop eating wheat? Do you remember?
He described, he actually being a very nice, kind of an educational doctor, described celiac disease perfectly. Celia, lying down flat, and how if I really wanted to prove it, I need a colonoscopy and a
Yeah, they go and they do an endoscopy, and then they take multiple biopsies.
Yeah, and so actually described the whole. So I'm sure he said gluten allergy because he did the full description for me. Whereupon I said, not really super excited about the endoscopy, and he says, well, you can stop eating wheat and see how you feel. And all of my life, I had never, I was quite skinny. I'm still very skinny, but I was extremely skinny. I'm 6'7" and I weighed 170, 180 pounds.
Wow.
Which was normal for me. I never had any real effect of being that skinny. I was very athletic, but I could never put on muscle. It frustrated my basketball coach enormously. He in my senior year, he put me on a diet of 3 eggs after every dinner. I would drink like Rocky. I drink raw eggs. Back
build up those muscles.
Yeah. Pre-salmonella, obviously. And then he would force me to, work out and lift weights and and I gained no muscle. I gained no weight. I was 160 when I graduated from high school. So I thought 180 was better. I quit within 6 months. I had gained 30 pounds. I was 210. And
so you're absorbing your nutrients in your food, right? Once you were diagnosed.
And more interestingly, I actually noticed that I was gaining muscle mass, which I'd never done in my life. And that really was to me the key differential of and I stopped falling asleep in the afternoon. So I had a real I was an investment banker, so I wasn't getting a ton of sleep. But nonetheless, I was, between the hours of 2 and 4 or 5, I could barely keep my eyes open at my desk. And suddenly I was able to be functional the whole day, very functional. So it really increased my energy levels a lot as well. So it was a massive change. It was extremely difficult because it was a 2002 diagnosis. I was
back in the dark ages.
38 years old. And we discovered UD spread. It took us a very long time, but we finally found it. And so it was quite difficult to work your way through the restaurants and to work your way through, because in New York, you're eating out all the time. So it's quite hard to figure. And then, the shocking amount of wheat in our food systems was also, we could not believe where they snuck the wheat in. So to get it down, I'd say it took 2 to 3 years, frankly, right? So I was continually poisoning myself, but I at least noticed that I was poisoning myself and, kept, bobbing and weaving my way through the culinary landscape to get rid of the wheat. So that was the diagnosis, at least.
And then what can you tell me a little bit about? So that was quite a challenge to get that diagnosis. It was
frankly, it was just one guy, right? One doctor. So old school guy.
Wow. Luckily you found him.
Yeah, no, and it was very serendipity. I mean, it was my wife's OBGYN's father.
Oh, wow.
She said, Jackson will really hit it off with him. He's exactly the guy. It's true. I love talking to him. So he's a very interesting person. So it was really more about a personal reference than anything. It wasn't medically driven.
So what has your biggest challenge been since you've been diagnosed? So you get diagnosed, you're going on your gluten-free diet. What I know everybody kind of goes through ebbs and flows, like, oh my gosh, I know what's wrong with me. I have celiac disease or whatever, and I have to cut out wheat, rye, barley, and the both of ours, we have some problems with oats too, but not everybody. What has been like you see the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge is traveling, right? And while as the cuisines of Japan and Mexico are a nice safe harbor in almost any, any town in the US with, with some, you have to be relatively careful, but at least you're kind of in a corn rice environment. Everything else is just laden with gluten. You can't make a sauce in France, Germany, America without putting gluten in it. And the whole idea that you can never have gravy again as long as you live is really hard because gravy's good, gravy's fun. My favorite poisoning example is the forget exactly what the other ingredient was, but it's basically a cheese soup, like a broccoli cheese soup that they serve on the United flight from Houston to LaGuardia. And invariably it was, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I had just had 3 meetings. I'm running the airport. I'm starving to death. And the only thing to eat is this soup, which of course I would eat with a question mark and then pay just dearly for days and days and days. The problem is, as you put it, being an ectomorph, you need massive quantities of calories, and learning how not to get hungry, not to get desperate. And if you do get hungry and desperate, to have a protein bar in your pocket, to have to know to go buy nuts and raisins at the airport before you get on the plane because they're going to starve you. Those kind of adaptions to traveling really, that took 10 years, right? So although at home, it probably took 2 to 3 years to kind of get yourself straight. The learning how to travel with celiac was a really huge challenge.
Yeah, when I was first diagnosed, actually, my physician who diagnosed me told me that I needed to quit my job because of the, I traveled for work.
Yeah.
And I needed to quit my job because I was not going to be able to travel. And I said, no, we need to make a change, right? So, if there were some that's where I think of, if there was some kind of therapy like lactate, some people, if they have milk or something, right, and they have an adjunct therapy, and I know they're working on that in the pipelines, it would be nice to have. So, because there's times, and there's times I see where kids are in the airport. I've been stuck in the airport, and those kids don't want to eat just a salad. And they've eaten like 3 or 4 bars, and they're getting a tummy ache because they're eating too many nuts and bars, and you're right. Traveling is not easy, and people just may not understand that, it sounds simple, but it's, being able to eat without fear when you're traveling and in the airport it's really, sometimes I used to pack a suitcase when I traveled. Half the suitcase had food in it because I just didn't know what I could eat. So a lot of times we don't hear a lot from males, the women are the ones who speak up. They tell us their story. Yeah. They tell us, their whole diagnosis journey like you did. But sometimes men don't prioritize their health. And so what advice would you have, for other men or tuning into this podcast, and it could be children, about, what they should learn from you? And just, do you have any words of wisdom there?
Yes. I think, and so the basic male attitude was, and especially as encapsulated working in investment banking, is suck it up, torture your body, and deal with the pain and suffering and work your way through it, right? That is the that is the way we're taught to behave. We can question that, but we won't. And so it's very difficult to learn to listen to your body, first of all. And second of all, because, and again, maybe this is a personal failing rather than a gender failing, but taking the big issue with celiac for me was taking responsibility for my own health, which for whatever reason, males tend to sub that out to their significant other, to their mother, and that is, I mean, I remember speaking to a therapist actually, and they said, you have to do this yourself. You can't just sit back and wait for people to serve you gluten-free food. You can't sit back and assume that your health is perfect just because it has been your entire life. You have to assume that the celiac disease has impacted you in some other way, and you need to seek out help. But you need to do it yourself. You need to book the doctor's appointment yourself. And that stuck with me. And that is like taking response, first of all, listening to your body, and second of all, actually moving forward and taking responsibility for your own health, be it dentist appointments or simple things, is incredibly important, and very, at least in my case, I don't want to condemn the entire male gender, but in my case it was very hard to learn.
No, Jackson, I think that is such a good message, because we talk about empowerment, and you're empowered to be, to have a great job. You're empowered to, exercise and play sports. But sometimes when it comes to going to a doctor, that's where I think a lot of people struggle with. Well, first of all, they don't want to have a disease. I mean, I remember my dad said to me, first when I told him I was diagnosed, the first thing he said to me is, "You didn't get that from my side of the family." I was like, what? So, I was like, I'm not blaming on anybody here. I'm just saying I do have a celiac disease. So what else is there anything else that you would wish people to know about celiac disease that comes to mind?
Well, and I'm one of those people that actually speaks a lot about it. So you'll find me at corporate dinners explaining to an entire table what it is.
And we like that.
Yeah. It's that, and the one thing that I always say, you have to understand it's an autoimmune disorder. So the general reaction is, you can't possibly be a celiac, you're too skinny. Like, well, there are large celiacs, there are small celiacs. You have to understand it's an autoimmune disorder. The way the body reacts to it it's an inflammation, and the body will react, everybody will react differently to it. And I also am very proactive about talking to, I get labeled into the hypochondriac side of things, but talking to my doctors around, well, this happened and then this happened, and aren't those two things linked together? And can't you look at me on a holistic basis instead of, an ENT basis or a gastro basis or a gastroenterologist basis or a general or a cardiologist? I mean, it's all interrelated. So, it's very hard in modern medical practice to get a holistic point of view of your health. And you have to basically advocate for it. So one, understanding everybody is different and autoimmune disorder affects everybody differently. And two, really advocating yourself for treating you as an individual patient with problems in many different areas that are related. You yourself know are interrelated, and you need to communicate that to your doctors or try to have a conversation with them at the very least.
I love that, Jackson, because that's one of the things we've really worked on is the extraintestinal manifestations. And we start to collect all the data. And when you're collecting all the data in the registry and you're starting to see patterns, right? And you're seeing, oh, people are having migraine headaches. Oh, all these people are having, and you and I talked a little bit about muscles and tendons, and we talk about peripheral neuropathy, which is the tingling in your fingers and toes. And you start to notice, and in my case, I had something very bizarre, which was when I got diagnosed, my eyesight got stronger. It went back to 20/20. Wow. Because I was absorbing my nutrients. So everybody, as you were saying, it's an autoimmune, it's an autoimmune disease. And let's look at the whole person, right? Just like the vet looks at the whole animal, we look at the whole person like an autoimmune disease. And I love the empowerment, because health is so important. It really is our most precious commodity, because if you don't have your health, you can't do all the other things in your life. And they say that health is wealth, but I think it's important for men and everyone to hear that message, because it can take a long time to get an appointment with the gastroenterologist these days. So don't get frustrated. Make your appointment. It may take you 3 to 6 months. There's a shortage, but go ahead and make that appointment so you can look for a diagnosis. So can you tell me, what would a cure mean to you? I mean, would you want a cure? Would you think of an adjunct therapy? What are your thoughts about having treatments beyond and therapies beyond the gluten-free diet?
Oh, I mean, I think it would be unbelievable, because if avoiding gluten gives you energy, right, and restores your ability to gain muscle and exercise, more strongly and be more alert during the day, then, but at the same time, knowing that, in my case, I presumably poisoned myself for 38 years, what kind of lingering problems there are because of that, right? So I think some of your research has shown, or some of the research that you've helped promote has shown, linkages to a whole bunch of different very serious diseases, and those will become more prevalent as you age, right? And so as all the toxins that you've absorbed over your life, including the gluten, start to manifest themselves. And so I think that, to me, would be the primary motivation. The secondary motivation would be, well, if I get poisoned, it would be nice to be able to take something to remove that instead of suffering for 3 days. And the suffering for 3 days is just the gastrointestinal discomfort. The bloating and the sinus infection that I typically get afterwards lasts for months. So that obviously would be a knock-on effect. So that all of that would be enormous. So any kind of a cure would be just a fantastic step forward for kind of personal health reasons.
Yeah, and then one of the most common questions we get was, how did this trigger, right? Why did this start? How did I get this? Like, my body went from tolerance to intolerance. What made this happen? And how do you reverse that so that you go back to tolerance again? So yeah, I feel like we're in a, with some of the more investment and interest in celiac disease, that I do see hope for the future. And there's so much if I look at what we've done in the past to make gluten-free food available, affordable, safe, and accessible, we're just on this road, right? We're on this journey together, so that we can, I say, live life to the fullest and eat without fear. That said, any last knowledge, anything else you want to say before we sign off our Zoom recording here?
Yeah,
Jackson?
the one thing I missed in the personal responsibility kind of angle of being a celiac is, of course, taking responsibility for what you cook and actually participating in shopping and preparing your own food, which again is a low viewed on the male scale of things, is a low value added activity. And to me, it's just so important and really adds a lot to your understanding of who you are, what makes you feel good, experimenting with food. So I have to say, it did feel a little bit like a punishment, as you said, when I was first diagnosed. Having to order really, really, really bad wine in Irish pubs was always a terrible, a terrible punishment. But
hey, we helped launch the first gluten-free beer. I want you to know that. There's been a lot of other beers along the way.
But in the end, I think the the takeaway of responsibility and owning kind of what goes into your body and how you manage that is a lifelong improvement, frankly.
Well, thank you, Jackson. That's a great message.